breaking. So take it away.
Well, Jay, you got much more encouragement at home than I did. My wife told me, she said, Kent, don't try to be smart, don't try to be funny, just be yourself.
There you go.
So with that, we might just make reference that a lot of things that we're talking about really build on the concepts that are presented in my book, Asking About Asking, and it's been a lot of fun to do some exciting things based on that. In fact, I'll just give kind of a sneak preview, and that is that later this year, the publisher will be releasing the second edition of Asking About Asking with some new material that focuses on some research that we've done over the last couple of years in terms of the obstacles that people like us run into, whether full-time professionals or volunteers, but those obstacles that people encounter in really doing asking for major gifts. But that's coming up soon. For today, we're going to focus on 10 proven asking techniques. And this certainly isn't exhaustive, but I want to start with tip number 1. And it may seem obvious, but that is to decide who to ask. And so I want to underscore really that prospect identification really is a big deal. And one of the big mistakes that we see with lots of fundraising efforts is that we're talking to the wrong person. It's somebody who may have passion for the mission, but they don't have the resources to support that. Or vice versa, maybe somebody with enormous resources but simply have no interest in the particular cause. And so the decision on who to ask, first of all, is a question about which funder. And typically we want to look for a high rating on 3 different factors. Number 1, does this prospect care about what we care about? That's the affinity connection. The second point is capacity. Do they have the financial capacity that they could give at a level that would be impactful if they were so inclined? And then the third element is generosity, and that is, do they have a track record of actually being philanthropic or generous? And I know later on Jay is going to touch on some of the technical aspect of the decide who, but before the rest of our 10 tips make any sense, we really need to have in our mind a picture of who it is that we're going to approach, because there will be some very personal characteristics and considerations that we'll want to use in implementing the next 9 strategies. So tip number 2 is start with why. And it's so important that we know exactly what it is we're asking somebody to contribute towards. And I want to just say up front, it's not rent, it's not salaries, it's not supplies, equipment, computers. And as important as it is, we're really not asking them to give so they can buy that new computer software, even if it's Bloomerang. Okay, that's the tool. But the essence really is the why. What is the purpose of our not-for-profit organization? What is it that would be accomplished if the contribution were to be made? And so what we want to say is that you want to put a face on your mission. I love listening to stories of those organizations that truly do change people's lives. And I will tell you, recently I was doing a board retreat. This was with a higher education foundation, and I asked, there were about 25 people in the room, I asked the question, who would care if we no longer were in business, if the foundation simply folded, who would care? And the common theme that ran through the room was students would care. And so I just said, name one. And as obvious as that seems, there was only one person in the room that was ready to do that. And she gave a name, and it happened to be a young lady. I said, tell me her story. And I want to tell you, as that story was told, it was just 2 or 3 paragraphs, but as the story was told, it was so moving that it moved me to tears. And it essentially, it did put a face on the mission. And so if we can start with why, tell the story of somebody whose life has been impacted by our mission, or somebody who's been prevented from participating with our mission, that makes it very real and personal. Once we do that, then we can talk about the numbers. And so we say, use words if you must. So next, I just want to show you, I think this is such a powerful image. It does a great job of conveying the urgency, the passion, the mission. And this is for the University of Wisconsin Foundation. And it says, your legacy, their future. Whoever staged that photograph, I think, must be a genius. But to me, that's an example of starting with why. And if you read none of the words, you still get the idea. So that's tip number 2. And Jay and Stephen, what I'm wanting to do today is really to move kind of quickly through these 10 tips in hopes that we can save time for interaction and be able to respond to questions of any of those who may have them in the chat room.
I totally agree. I'll be following the same modus operandi.
Okay, great. Plus, I don't know about presenter number 2, but presenter number 1 isn't all that great. I've heard him before, so we'll just kind of speed through this as much as possible. But here's tip number 3, and speaking of our prospective donors, show them the price tag. I mean, how much does the solution cost? We identify the problem, we come up with a solution, and whatever it is, in our case statement, we need to have an idea of what does it cost to deliver the solution. And if, for example, as you see here, if it's $12.5 million, that, we may think that's a big number. How could we ever go to the marketplace with that? Well, whatever the cost is what the cost is. And people aren't going to fund it if we're not comfortable owning and getting real with it. So once we figure out what the answer is, be upfront with it. Show them the price tag. This is how much the solution costs, and until we have that in place, we're really not in a position to follow our next tip, which is show them how we get there, also known as the gift chart. And in his introduction, Steve mentioned that dirty, dark secret about me. I am an accountant. Please don't tell anybody that. But numbers matter. They're certainly not the most important thing. But one of the reasons that I love numbers is that numbers tell me a lot about things that aren't numbers. And so if you look on the screen, we have a sample gift chart there. And using the example of a $10 million project, if we're going to have to raise $10 million, it is not going to be the result of a million people who each make a $10 gift. Now, we might be able to raise $10 million for a disaster recovery like is happening in Moore, Oklahoma right now. You might be able to raise $10 million by a million people each giving $10. But in terms of the day in, day out fundraising efforts that you and I are going to be involved in, I would not want to risk my career, my reputation on simple arithmetic. And so realistically, and if you look at this example, there's about a dozen decisions that are going to make or break this campaign. This is based on the idea that 11 gifts are going to total $5.5 million. And realistically, if we're going to raise $10 million, we're going to have a gift someplace in the range of $1.5 million to $2 million. The gift chart does a great job of communicating to our audience, our prospective donors, this is what the solution looks like. And so don't keep it a secret. It does take big gifts, and we may as well be upfront with ourselves first, and then with others in the marketplace. One of the things I love to do with this particular tool is ask people to identify where they might see themselves, and ideally to look for a range of giving. And I was having a conversation along these lines, and the person I was talking to, these weren't the exact numbers, but just using this as an illustration, her response was, we would probably give in between $500,000 and $1 million. Well, that's a range, and I wasn't prepared for the importance of the follow-up question that I asked, but I'll share it with you and encourage you to use it, and that is, well, first of all, I said that sounds extremely generous, but it's also a big difference. When it comes to it, how will you decide, how will you choose between giving $500,000 or $1 million? And she went on to explain exactly what the factors would be as they made that decision. That became some extremely important feedback that we could use to equip her to make the gift that she wanted to make. And so develop a gift chart for your particular campaign. And by the way, you are in a campaign. It may not be a multi-year capital campaign. Even if it's just this year's campaign for scholarships, it's a campaign. So define the bottom line, decide what the price tag is, come up with a sample gift chart, and don't keep it a secret. Tell them what it takes to get there. Tip number 5 is to define the ask. And I don't know about you, but I know for much of my career, it was easy for me to get choked around asking for the gift. And part of the reason for that is it's poorly defined. And so just to make it simple, I want to introduce a written proposal. And as you can see, this is very compact. It's one page. It could be on an index card if need be. There are really about 7 different elements here that really go into a formal ask. Our recommendation is that every ask that's worth one-on-one contact, that you would formalize it and put it in the form of a proposal. And so we want to start with identifying who is it that we're making the proposal to. And in the example here, we're addressing it to a couple, Katie and Jason Rutherford. Identify specifically who is the request coming from. Aren't you impressed with my ability to draw straight lines? Yeah, me too.
Very good.
But specifically, what is the date, and then what is the amount? I wish we had time to go in more depth, but all of these factors are things that do not come from us as the fundraiser or the charitable organization, but rather it's input that we receive from the prospect. And so if the Rutherfords are inclined to give in the $1.5 million range, let's be specific and feed that back to them when it's time to make the request. What is the purpose of the gift? Is there naming involved? And if so, what's that like? And then there's this thing that we call the fine print. And our recommendation is that you always make the fine print the same size as the other print. We have nothing to hide and want to make it easy to stay on the same page. And if there are specific considerations that go into it, let's be upfront with that. But ultimately then, we have a very simple proposal that we can put in front of the prospect, the donor, so that we're all talking about the same thing. So tip number 5 is to define the ask. Define the ask. Tip number 6, we're climbing the 10-step staircase. Now, you don't have to use our approach, but we certainly would recommend that you use a proven process. And let me just share by way of illustration. Think of the fundraising endeavor as if you're standing at the bottom of a tall staircase. Where we would like to get is through this door at the top that's marked yes. That's our ideal. I don't know about you. I do have long legs. I can't get from here to there in one step. And so this process of asking strategic questions, understanding the donor's wishes, and helping them get to the right yes for them, that proven process is something that's been extremely helpful throughout the years. And so again, we would certainly recommend it. But whether it's our process or another one, find a process that works for you, a methodology that you can rely on and that you can share with your contributors so that they can be a key part of the solution. Tip number 7 is to define success. And everybody seems to have his own definition for success. I want to share with you 2 perspectives. One, we want to find success from the perspective of the nonprofit organization. The other is from the donor's perspective. So first of all, we define success at the nonprofit level as reaching the fundraising goal. Going back to the earlier example, if we've got a $10 million goal and we raise $9.5 million, that's a lot of money, but we just fell $500,000 short of the goal. Success, we can't declare success until we reach or exceed that goal. And that makes all the sense in the world to the not-for-profit organization. When it comes to the individual donor, however, that definition isn't valuable, it's not useful. And so from the donor viewpoint, success means making a well-informed decision. And so rather than coming to the marketplace and telling the donor this is what you have to do, or we've decided this is what you should do, what we want to do is find out what their inclination is, what might they do if they were to fully achieve their objectives, and then help them make a decision that's well informed, that's the right decision for them at this time, for this project, at this place in their own circumstances. And so once we understand what success is, that positions us to move to tip number 8. And this is what I call the twin risks: the risk of early rejection and the risk of early acceptance. Let me give you an example. The risk of early rejection. We show up without much cultivation, ask for a major gift, and we get a prompt no. What happened? Why did the prospects say no? It's because they weren't prepared to say yes, and to say yes at the right level. And so we've just encountered that early rejection. Early acceptance is the opposite. We show up and without much cultivation make an ask, would you give a gift? And they say, yes, we would, and they write a check for $100. And the good news is we have $100. Bad news is they're done and we're done. And so we want to manage our interaction in such a way that we're only asking for responses for questions that we're ready to hear and for answers that the prospect is actually well positioned to give. So I don't make a request for a gift until we get to the top of that 10-step staircase. That allows us to avoid those twin risks. Tip number 9 is to make a plan. Now, one of the things that Stephen didn't tell you, the majority of our work is in about 4 areas. We do a lot of work in major capital campaigns, in major gift solicitation, strategic planning, and board development and governance. So in strategic planning, it's laborious work, it's important work, but it's so very valuable. And our experience is that the results are rarely better than the plan. And so whether that's at the organizational level, a strategic plan, or at the individual donor level with a solicitation plan, if we don't have a good plan, we cannot expect to get good results. So here's one example of what a cultivation or solicitation plan looks like. And we need to start off by knowing who we're talking to and exactly what is the purpose of this call. And that purpose may differ from one donor to the next and from one call to the next with a given donor. But if it's to ask for a gift, let's plan to make an ask. If it's to cultivate a gift, that's a very different purpose. Let's know what specifically, what cultivation questions that we want to ask. What do we want to be the outcome from this meeting? And so once we know that, then we'll know who needs to go, what materials need to go along with us, and when the call is over, we can ask the question, was the purpose achieved? If yes, what needs to happen next? And if no, what needs to happen next? So develop a plan and then stick to the plan. Afterwards, evaluate the results. Tip number 10. I think you probably heard this from your mother, but it's practice. Practice, practice. Our best recommendation is that the practice does not begin with a live call. Work in a call team. Include the staff person, whether it be the CEO or the development director, whomever, but along with a peer, someone who is in a peer role and relationship with the donor. Before you make those donor calls, practice. What is our conversation going to be like? Who's carrying which part of it? What things do we want to explore? Are there some things that we want to stay away from? So that's the first form of practice. The second practice is actually conducting the call. The third part of that practice is kind of some evaluation after the fact, and then let's go out and repeat the process again. Now, these are kind of simple and fairly straightforward, but at this point, I want to hand it off to Jay. And Jay, if you'd kind of pick it up and talk to us about how a database supports major gifts solicitation.
I will be glad to, Kent. Thank you so much for sharing all that advice with me. In fact, I thought I might comment on one area. My wife and I have been privileged and honored to make a few major gifts over the last 4 or 5 years. And I've had a couple situations where the nonprofit used the proposal format that you talked about, Kent, and the results and how we felt about it and how quickly it consummated, it was the difference of literally night and day compared to places that did not. So I can give you firsthand testimony, Kent, that works, and raise my hand and say that's the case. Well, I'm going to tie into some of Kent's steps here. The first slide that you see there says step 1, decide who to ask. And I really feel that the database has to be that tool. Kent said it right, referring to it as a tool. It's got to literally be the right arm for everybody that's involved in the fundraising process, and that requires it to be something that everybody can use. And I'm going to ask sort of a rhetorical question here that I'm going to venture to say that probably 90% of you are using some sort of donor database out there. And recently at the AFP conference in San Diego, the National Association of Fundraising Professionals Conference, we did an informal survey there with all the people that came by our booth, and we asked them, of the folks that are using a donor database, what percentage of your product do you use? And ironically, the number that we found more times than not was right around 20%. That people felt that they were using 20% of the product or the functionality of that, yet most of the people told me that they made their buying decision based upon how many features and functions they felt could be jammed into that product. And so ironically, those work against each other. As you can see from my bullet point next to the bottom there, large amounts of features and functionality usually equal complexity, and complexity keeps the fundraisers out. And that's very, very scary to think that the people that are on the front lines and the people that are involving board members and other connectors to make things happen, none of that information in some cases is making it into the database. And so you run the risk of that all walking out the door when changeover occurs, which it inevitably will over some time period. So I think it needs a revolution. I borrowed this from Les Mis, the musical, to talk about there, but revolutionary change usually comes from game-changing ideas, and those ideas usually are ideas whose time has come. And I think you got to combine that to make a revolution come to life with relentless execution. So let me tie those points together there and talk a little bit about that and see. The game-changing ideas that we see here, and I'm going to date myself a little bit. I started working with someone likes the referral to Les Mis. Thanks, Valerie. But one of the things that I've seen over my 30 years, I started being involved with this marketplace in 1983 with a product called Fundmaster, and is that we always had to package in several days, if not weeks, of training. And I kept asking my partners that as we were building the Bloomerang product, why is it that I can use this smartphone that I have in my hand? I wish I had the camera like Kent has, but I could show you the smartphone. I've got an iPhone in my hand right now, and that iPhone does about 10 times more than the Fundmaster product ever thought about doing. And I've never had a single minute of training, but yet I fully believe, at least a third or more of the functionality of that product every single day. So I challenged our development team to see if we could make that happen. And hopefully that will allow anyone to be able to use and feel comfortable with using the product. So those are the game-changing ideas. What was also a game changer here was bringing best practices to life, and you'll see me allude to a couple individuals whose reputations are just like Kent's. They've been involved in the market for many, many years, but in this case they were actually conducting the proper research in that it could be documented on what were the best practices that could come to life. So they sort of came out of the academia front more so than the day-to-day work like Kent and I and others are involved in for that. So you'll see that in just a second too for it. And what we've decided to do is focus on core functions only, which allows all fundraisers to use the database. And that's the biggest change I've seen here recently, is the fact that we now have all of the people that are on the front lines using the database, putting their notes in, figuring out who's engaged and not engaged. And believe it or not, that's quite revolutionary. In fact, everybody using the database enables true donor engagement and true donor record keeping, and we believe that really results in fundraising success, making those steps that Kent was talking about in the asking process truly come to life. And the Bloomerang database, just to give a little bit of background, is built upon these four key principles here: enabling best practices, bringing donor retention and donor communications to life, and we'll talk about my two experts that really focus in on each of those two areas, making it extremely easy to use, and focusing in on results, not features for that. In fact, as we're showing the product, if someone's doing the old spreadsheet where they're putting check marks in for the features there, I always tell them, we're probably not going to fare too well, but if you'll go in and play with the package for a while, I think you'll be hooked on what it can mean for you on a day-to-day basis. And as I alluded to, we've been involved with other products such as FundMaster, eTapestry. I was headed up the All True product for Blackbaud. And each of those times, those products got better and better and better. I really believe that we finally have got it right, or close to right now, and we'll leave that for all of you to be the judge of as we take a look at it here. Well, the two experts that I'm talking to are Dr. Adrian Sargent on the right, the professor of philanthropy at the School on Philanthropy at IU, and really has done years and years of research on donor retention, donor loyalty. Many of you out there have probably had the privilege of listening to Adrian speak, or being able to read one or two of his publications. And then on the left, you'll see Mr. Tom Ahern, and who's sort of the guru of donor communications. And both of them were kind enough to throw in and say, I believe in your project, and I think we can make a difference, and I would like to allow my intellectual property to be part of what we build in the best practices here. And I always remember sitting down and having lunch with Adrian and asking him, I said, you know, you've been doing this for many years, written several books and publications, you speak at every national conference. Are you really making a difference? Are we improving donor retention? And there was this long pause. It was actually long enough for me to actually have one or two bites of food in between, but I thought, well, I better not say anything. And he came back and he goes, not really. And I explained the project, and I said, would you like to lend your expertise and your intellectual property to that? And literally within 2 seconds, Dr. Sargent said, I'm in. And I knew we were off to something there, and it makes such a big difference when you have information and best practices coming from individuals like these two. And if you haven't read any of their publications, or if you haven't subscribed to Tom's newsletter, I highly recommend both of them. They literally are something that you will gain a lot of knowledge from. So if I'm talking about the Bloomerang product, it's a web-based product. I just want to give you a couple tidbits of information here, but this is how you log into the product. When you log in, it brings up the information here about your constituents. And as you can see, the product only has these basic icons that you see here with those four icons there. And those allow you to go into the various aspects of the product. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about was what Kent was referring to, the prospect identification. And we think a key part of that, being able to figure out the affinity, is the engagement level. And as you can see, this engagement level moves into one of 5 categories. If I was able to go live there, people can go from cold to cool to warm to hot to on fire here. And those are based upon these parameters that you see listed here. These are what we call our engagement factors. And the secret recipe that's behind all this, the secret sauce is actually Dr. Sargent telling us exactly how much weighting each one of these factors will have. And we've stored the recipe with the Coca-Cola recipe down in Atlanta in some bank down there for that. So, so we've got that, because the first question people ask me is, can I modify that recipe? And we may at some point allow that to be the case, but for right now, we've got what we think this is really dialed in based upon their recency and pattern of giving, whether or not they are a cash or check donor versus a sustaining donor, such as someone that's have a recurring transaction or a multi-year pledge. Obviously, the number of years of giving makes a big difference there, whether or not they're upgrading or downgrading, lapsed. Then we fall into two areas of their involvement with you: their attendance at events and their volunteer activities. Both of those are very, very important. And as that information comes over from your website, if they're registering for an event or inviting other people to an event, or they're volunteering and you have a volunteer sign-in or registration, all of that flows directly over, and it moves this engagement needle up or down based upon their involvement. The next several items concentrate in on their communication. So if you send out any email, are they one of the 20 or 25 or 30% that actually opens the email? We think people opening and reading and clicking through the email, maybe forwarding on to other people, is a very good sign of engagement. As well as obviously unsubscribing means that you move the needle down. If we have their communication preferences on file, we give a lot of weighting to that. And then one that I think is very, very important here, I'll try to put a star here. Oh, and that's not a good star. Kent, you would have done much better for that. But this is inbound interactions. We all know that if someone's reaching out to you, it makes all the difference in the world. So if they've called you, or if they, nice job there, Kent. If they've called you, or if they've emailed you, or if they've stopped by your office, we give almost twice the weighting to people that have inbound interactions. And I always remember a good friend of mine is Chuck Longfield. And Chuck, one of the tidbits that when I was involved with the Team Approach product, he always told me, if someone reaches out and tells you that their address has changed, put a big gold star beside that person's name in your database, because that person is a plan giving or a legacy gift prospect that's going to happen down the road. You got 4 or 5 times the chance of that, because they care enough to let you know that they're involved and that they want you to keep communicating with you. And then one we find that's often overlooked: if people have soft credits, that means that they've brought in matching gifts from their corporation, if they've got a family foundation or a legacy fund or a donor advised fund, or they just bring people in to sponsor them in an event participation, those are soft credits which equate to stewardship. And stewardship is, I don't know where that is on Kent's staircase, but it's got to be up there near the top, that someone that's a good steward makes all the difference in the world. And then we've got the social media, and that'll be in the product later. So if anybody talks about you on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, we know that that's not as powerful as making a gift, but it's the next step toward that, so we give credit for that. So all of those come to life here, so that this engagement level is moving up or down at all times. And I always tell people, think about how much fun it would be to be able to come in on a Monday morning and get a report waiting on your desk saying, these are all the people in my database that moved up or down one full engagement level in the last 7 days. I honestly think that might affect who you reach out with for telephone calls and appointments and follow-up during the coming week based upon that, especially if you have someone classified as a major donor and they've dropped an engagement level or 2, they are about to become a donor attrition statistic that you can do something about. This is what we do as far as showing donor engagement over time. This is their timeline, and we can see every touch point that we've had with the person. And this is where, Kent was talking about whether or not you're doing a solicitation or an ask. You can see all of the cultivation that's happening here, and then the highlights over at the right here show what's moved the engagement needle, the largest percentage of basis points on that engagement graph for you. So when we go into the moves management area, we leave this up to the organization. Some organizations want to track more information than others, but as you can see here for this sample organization, we've got an assigned solicitor, so that may be a volunteer or a board member, or it may be a member of your staff to do that, what stage they're in, and most organizations we've had the privilege of working with so far have a 4 or 5 step staging process that they go through. The ask amount, the action, the last action date that we have, and next action date, those are all there for you to make this come to life, and particularly in some of the reports here. So this is a sample of one of the moves management reports. This is where you can edit and move it around, and as you adjust this, this is what comes to life. So in this particular case, we've got a volunteer by the name of Anna who has the privilege of working both with Larry Bird and SpongeBob SquarePants. And you can see their ask and what stage that they're in and their year-to-date amount raised that they have with our foundation. All of that's at your fingertips. And what's beautiful about this is I can drop this right in and print it out. I can click through and go right to that person's record. I can make all of those items come to life very quickly and very easily. And last but not least, this is the dashboard as you come into the system that shows the donor retention every single day. In fact, if you log in the morning, do some things, leave for an appointment, and come back in the afternoon, you'll see that. This is figured going back exactly 365 days. And it's showing you in that 365 days how many donors from the previous 365 actually stayed with you. So that retention rate can change from day to day and from week to week. And you can really see whether or not you're making a positive effect on that. Because if you start to see it go down over several weeks in a row, obviously some action to be taken. And the nice thing about it, you can pull out exactly who are the people that are falling off to cause that to be the case and maybe go back and rescue them rather than waiting for your next annual appeal or some other type of solicitation to take place. So with that in mind, Kent and Stephen, I want to throw it back there so we've got a good full 20 minutes here of question and answer period to see. So Stephen, do we have any questions that have come into us so far? And if you wouldn't mind directing them to Kent or myself or both.
Yeah.
We'll probably find it's both commenting on most of them, but feel free to start us with one or the other.
Yeah, sure. We collected a few questions from people when they registered, so we've got a few here that we can throw out. And again, for those of you who are listening, feel free to send any questions over, and we'll get to those as well. And Jay, it looks like we've got a couple very software-specific questions. Sam was wondering how Bloomerang compares to Altru in terms of general admission organizations. Maybe you could speak to that for Sam really quickly.
Okay. We don't really have a ticketing module or ticketing functionality built into that. We do have some organizations that sell tickets as part of their special events, and we create a what we call a ticketing or event widget on their website. So their website is the entry place that they can bring that information in and populate the appropriate fields in the database from the website. We've also explored working with a couple web-based ticketing software programs so that people can issue tickets and be able to have the donors or the members print out tickets with the appropriate information to get you into the event or into the performance to do that. And Bloomerang has some very easy to use APIs, application programming interfaces. So if there's someone out there that has that need, let us know. We'll be glad to explore it with you. We may or may not be able to do it, but if it's pretty basic ticketing needs, usually we can make that come to life.
And what about planned gifts, Jay? Looks like Jonathan was curious about planned gifts.
Oh, find that all the time. Within the gift entry area, it's got the ability to record all the details for planned gifts. And of course, a big part of the reason of tracking engagement and all the other key factors that we were briefly looking at there, and I'll defer to Kent to take this a step further, is it lets you know who are the ideal plan giving prospects so you know where to spend your valuable time being able to do that. One of the things I always love is if you send out your monthly or quarterly newsletter and you've got a plan giving article and the software tracks for you who clicked on that article and wanted to know a little bit more about it. Wow, I think that's somebody you might want to have a planned giving call with. If they've clicked on the article and read something about that, that really gives you a good hint. What do you think, Kent?
Oh, I agree entirely. And the power of software, particularly Bloomerang, to track what people's interest in goes back to that very donor-centric approach that we've had so much success with across all kinds of organizations.
Great.
Well, Kent, there's a question here from Gloria. You probably saw it, and I thought maybe you could speak to this. She's working with an organization that's in need of some sponsors and inquiries from other cities, but it looks like they don't really have the funds to move forward on that. What advice would you give Gloria for an organization maybe doesn't have the funds to expand, but definitely wants to?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hi, Gloria, and thank you for your question. But we would go back to the whole relationship thing, and that is we want to be able to identify somebody in that geography, in that locale, that is interested in what we're interested in, and then begin with the primary qualification, and that is that an asker must a giver be. And so before we can engage somebody in leading us to another donor, we need to help them make a donation decision themselves. And so if I don't know somebody, let's say I'm going to be in Dallas and reaching out there, if I don't know the person, I want to find somebody who does know the prospect so that they can serve as linkage for us. So begin with your research tools. Again, with Bloomerang, we're going to be able to identify those in our constituent base, whether they've contributed or not, who geographically are connected, and let that tool help you track the relationships and work those relationships so that we can bring people to a point of making their decision. Great.
Well, Kent, we had another, since you showed all those great forms for the asks and proposals there, we've got an interesting question here. The question is, we're not asking our donors for millions of dollars. Is a written proposal really necessary? What would you say to that person who's maybe questioning using a written proposal?
Yeah. Well, I always think it's interesting to know what the reluctance is. Sometimes somebody says, well, that's really too low. But here's what I want to say is that the more specific we can be with our request, the easier it is for the person that we're approaching to say yes. And so think in terms that the impact of using a proposal is to elevate the gift. And if we know that people have a tendency to give more to a more formal request, that's going to provide the encouragement. But again, it allows us to zero in on where do we have points of agreement and where is there a gap, if any.
And Ken,
go
I might add too, I've seen that successfully used down to the $5,000 level for a transaction. And what I think is really wonderful about it, and I was talking to Tom Ahern about this, the details that are there, if you can store those, and whether it's in a database or a paper file or whatever, what a wonderful way to know what to report on and communicate back to that donor down the road of what the effect of their transaction has had on your mission and on the project and et cetera, because people are dying to find out what their money was used for and how successful it was and whether you need more to make success happen.
Absolutely. And when you made reference earlier, Jay, to donor stewardship, I will tell you, when I was in higher education, one of my favorite things to do on any given day was to reach out to those who were a long ways away from campus, who couldn't be there, but just to reach out to them by phone and say, I want to thank you for your gift, and just give you a glimpse into what that gift is accomplishing on campus today. And like you said, knowing what they specifically targeted their investment towards makes it easy for us to give a return on investment report that's meaningful to them.
Yeah, and one of Dr. Sargent's tenets is that it should be very easy for you to figure out what your average gift is for your organization. And if a new donor comes in that's above the average gift level, please don't send out the same thank you letter. Either send out a personalized letter or better yet, pick up the phone and call them or figure out a way to get a face-to-face meeting. The difference in the renewal rate of the latter versus the former is literally, 50, 60 percentage points difference.
Oh, it's breathtaking, yeah.
And it's really not that difficult. So that's one of the things we're building into the best practices. If it's something comes in above the average gift level, try not to use the same thank you letter. And ironically, for a lot of nonprofits, the person that's responsible for the thank you letter is the person that's the database administrator. They're really not a fundraiser, and they don't think about those things. To them, it's a task daily or weekly to get those letters out.
Right.
And a case in point, I went back to one of my eTapestry customers about 7 or 8 years later after I'd helped them set the system up. And Kent, you're not going to believe this, but they were still using the exact same thank you letter that I put in 7 years ago, and they were still sending it to every single donor every time they donated.
Wow.
Oh.
No one had changed it at all because they just assumed that the database would take care of that. And as you can imagine, if I was a donor and I gave twice a year, by the 14th time I got that letter, I might be wondering, is anybody watching the ship back here?
Well, pity the poor monthly donor.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Oh, wow. Well, hey, Jay, you wrote the letter. It had to be good. I mean, how could they replace it?
Well, I didn't write it. I actually helped them get it into the system. They wrote it.
Well, Jay, we've got a couple questions specific to our software. Deborah is wondering how it compares to the Salesforce product. And, of course, Salesforce was in the news today here in Indianapolis, so maybe it's appropriate to speak to that difference there, if you could.
Yeah, well, Salesforce is a wonderful product. I've used it in some commercial businesses. Stephen and I actually worked with a search engine optimization firm here in Indianapolis, and that's the product that we use. Unfortunately, it was designed for commercial businesses, and particularly the key thing I like to point out is what happens with a gift transaction. There is, and Kent, feel free for the CPA to jump right out here and talk about this. There is a big difference between a commercial invoice and a gift transaction. Let me just tell you a few things. Is it tax deductible? Is it not tax deductible? Is there a hard credit and a soft credit involved? Does it involve a memorial or a tribute? Do I need to split it between multiple funding categories? Is it the result of multiple appeals? All of those underlying factors that make a gift transaction so special and so wonderful, an invoice object can't really handle. And that's what most of the Salesforce solutions try to do. And then, unfortunately, the Salesforce product is not really supported directly in the nonprofit world by Salesforce itself. It's through a third-party group of providers. Some of them are excellent. But if you happen to get to somebody that doesn't stay in that business or doesn't really know what they're doing, you could be a little bit at their mercy on how well you customize the product to make that come to life for it. And then the old adage, the last thing I'll mention, anytime you customize something, you have to be aware of in future releases, does something that's in the general release change anything that you did in the customization and the customized version. So it's a couple things to keep in mind for that. It's an outstanding product, but it is a big product. Be aware, there's a lot to that. When you open it up, I don't know how many tabs are on that screen, but there's a large number of them. So be aware that it's going to cover all the bases, but you want to be aware that you have to understand what those bases are.
Well, Jay, let me jump in here, because over the years, I've just become a huge advocate for choosing the right tool for the job. And I grew up in rural America, and we used to say, if I had a pair of pliers and a piece of baling wire, I could fix just about anything. And I could. The fix wasn't all that great. But when it comes to philanthropy and fundraising, you can work with a deck of index cards. But there's some built-in limitations to that tool. And I guess one of the things that I've loved so much over the years about Bloomerang is this is designed to do exactly what fundraisers need. And Salesforce is designed to do exactly what a traditional Salesforce needs. And so in the same token that it would be a mistake to try to adapt Bloomerang to drive my commercial sales effort. It's a mistake to try to adapt something that's designed for a different purpose to do what Bloomerang can do. And one of the keys I would say in any selection process, ask yourself the question, does this tool work for me or do I work for it? And if the answer is the latter, run the other direction.
Yeah, definitely. And Jay, while we're talking about it, Kelly and Karen were interested in migrating data, so converting data from one tool to another. Maybe you could explain how we handle that process.
Well, that's the magic. That's the pulling the rabbit out of the hat, as the old saying goes. For that, fortunately, the person that the key architect of the Bloomerang product, a gentleman by the name of Rob Signorelli, has done this for many years, and he decided that we wanted to make a product that was just as easy to get data in and out of as it was to use on a day-to-day basis. So we make it very straightforward to bring the data in, and we've had a lot of experience in doing that. So it depends on the product that you're coming from. Obviously, if someone has information in a spreadsheet or in Microsoft Word or something basic like that, it's got primarily a one-to-one relationship of information. That's very simple. As we get into more sophisticated products, some of the commercially available products can very nicely be done. What we usually find, it's not the transfer of what was contained in this field over here in product A into product B, but many times we find as people using the system changed over the years, because most of the older commercially available packages, there was usually only 1 or 2 people at the nonprofit that knew how to run it. And if there was a changeover and the first person didn't really hand it off the baton with enough time and to train them, we find the same fields and the same screens of information being used for 2 or 3 different purposes. And that's where it gets to be a little bit fun to do that. But it's an ideal time. It's a real cleansing process. It's just like, I don't know if any of you have done this recently, but you go in and you clean that closet out and you take some stuff to the nearest thrift shop and you feel better that it's a nice, clean, organized closet. That's really what the conversion process is for doing that. And the nice thing about it, because it's pretty straightforward to bring the tools, we bring it in, it can be done in a much shorter period of time than what people have been used to in the past. So that's usually a very easy and a good way to learn the product too, because as we discuss the mapping of the fields, you really know all about the product as you're finishing that up.
Great. Great. And we go back in time through data. We don't limit it to 1 year or 5 years or anything. We go all the way back, correct?
Yes, yeah. If they've got information going back 20 years, and that's worthwhile for some of our educational institutions, we know that they want to know all the information about the alums, because those going back 20 years may be the ones that are the best major gift and planned giving prospects, right, Kent?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 5 minutes remaining, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We did say we would finish up here around 2, and for the folks who haven't had lunch yet, we don't keep them from their lunch. So, Kent, in just a few moments we have remaining, do you want to say a few words about where people can find out more about you and maybe get some more of your resources?
Yes. In fact, in just a moment there is a contact slide coming up, but what you're looking at right now is just a brief introduction to the Institute for Conversational Fundraising. And one of the things that we're at work doing on a large scale is really equipping nonprofit leaders to not just improve their fundraising, but rather to dramatically transform. And so we do a lot of work in seminars, board retreats, workshops with teams, and executive coaching, whether it's in the CEO office or the development office. And the Asking Academy is a dynamic new product program that's available. And I would just encourage anybody, if they're interested in really taking a big step forward, to just go to conversationalfundraising.com. And if you see something there that's of interest, we'd love to visit with you further. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to connect.
Great. And Jay, how about you? You're pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. I wonder if some folks could reach out to you there if they have any additional questions.
Oh, very much so. If you'll just go to our website, thebloomerang.co, and Stephen's made it very easy for people to connect to us in a multitude of different ways. We, in fact, have a couple LinkedIn groups for a Bloomerang users group, but more importantly, we have a donor retention one that has some good topics that people are discussing, but love to reach out to anybody anytime. And of course, if there's someone that would like to find out a little bit more, just let us know by coming to the website, and we will be glad to do that. One of the things that our sales team loves to do is to give people a chance to get their hands on and actually play with the new application, something I never dreamed I would even think about saying to anybody, even as little as 4 or 5 years ago. But now we have literally every customer that we present the product to, we leave a sandbox area so that they can play in it and have some time taking a look around it and see what they think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone who wants to, we'll share that with them. Well, thanks again, Kent. Thanks for taking an hour to share all your knowledge. And Jay, thank you for also taking the time. And thanks to all you listeners who took an hour out of your busy day to listen to us yak here. And for everyone listening, I will be sending out the slides of the presentation, so if there was something that maybe you wanted to refresh or awesome forms that Kent showed, I will be sending that out this afternoon. So look for that. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Kent.
See you, Jay.